Seneca, why you have more time than you think you do. Seneca was not a poor philosopher living a simple life in a hut somewhere. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, an advisor to emperors, a playwright, and for years, one of the most powerful political figures in the empire. If anyone in the ancient world had reason to feel like life was generous with them, it was Seneca. And yet, one of his most famous pieces of writing is an essay arguing that almost everyone around him was wasting the only truly valuable thing they had. The essay is called On the Shortness of Life, and its opening argument is almost aggressive in how directly it challenges a belief most people carry without question. People complain constantly, Seneca observed, that life is too short, that there simply isn't enough time to do what actually matters. But Seneca disagreed entirely. Life isn't short, he argued. We just waste enormous amounts of it on things that don't matter, and then act surprised when we reach the end without having lived the way we meant to. Think about how easily most days disappear. Hours spent worrying about things that never happen. Time spent trying to impress people whose opinions won't matter in 5 years. Energy spent chasing status, or reacting to minor irritations, or simply drifting through obligations without ever stopping to ask whether they're worth the time they cost. None of that time feels wasted while it's happening. It's only later, usually much later, that people look back and realize how much of it slipped past them without any real attention at all. Seneca had a particularly sharp point about busyness specifically, because he lived among people, senators, generals, wealthy Romans, who were constantly, visibly busy, and who wore that busyness almost like a badge of importance. He didn't buy it. Being busy, he argued, is not the same as living well. In fact, he suggested that many people fill their days with activity, specifically to avoid the harder, quieter work of actually thinking about what they want their life to be. It's easier to stay in constant motion than to sit still and confront the question of whether any of that motion is going anywhere. He also pushed back hard against the common habit of treating real living as something that happens later. People plan to actually start living once they retire, once they hit some financial goal, once their circumstances finally settle down. Seneca thought this was one of the most self-defeating patterns a person could fall into, because it treats the only time you actually have, right now, today, as a kind of holding pattern before the real thing begins, and there's no guarantee that later version of your life will ever arrive at all. None of this meant Seneca thought people should abandon responsibility and chase pleasure instead. That wasn't the Stoic answer either. His point was more precise than that. Time is the one resource you cannot get back once it's spent, and yet it's the resource most people guard the least carefully. People will fight over money, protect their possessions, get angry if someone wastes their belongings, but hand over hours and days of their own life without a second thought to distractions, obligations, and people who don't deserve that much of them. So what did Seneca actually recommend doing instead? Mostly, he argued for intention, paying close attention to where your time is actually going and being honest about whether that's where you want it to go. Reading deeply rather than skimming constantly. Spending time with people who add something real to your life rather than people who simply fill space. Doing work that means something to you, rather than work that only exists to keep you occupied. None of it is complicated advice, exactly. It's just advice that's easy to agree with and remarkably hard to actually practice, which is probably why he felt the need to write an entire essay making the case for it. There's something almost uncomfortable about reading Seneca's essay today, because very little about the way people waste time has actually changed in 2,000 years. The specific distractions have just gotten more numerous and more effective at holding attention. Seneca never had to compete with a feed engineered to keep him scrolling. And yet his core argument still lands exactly the same way it must have landed on wealthy Romans reading it for the first time. Not that life is too short, but that most of us are quietly, comfortably, spending it on things that will mean nothing to us later. If this episode made you think differently about how you're spending today, subscribe. We'll cover Epictetus next, and the one idea he built his entire philosophy around,